And we're live. Hi, everybody out there that is listening in on our Hangout on the Air. This is Jeff Moore, lead recruiter at Google, talking with a couple of my dear friends, Deb and Bryan, and we're going to talk about non-technical interview prep today, which is not my specialty, but I like to pretend I can talk about anything. And yeah, so we're going to have a little bit of fun. So Bryan was here last week, so we're going to let Bryan introduce himself first. And without further ado, Bryan, want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do at Google?
Sure. My name is Bryan Kaminski, and I work on our university programs and outreach team here at Google, specifically focused on our non-engineering programs. So that's roles like sales, marketing, finance, human resources, our enterprise group, our media platform services group that works with companies like DoubleClick and their YouTube organization. And our role is to work with our students on campus that are going to either be for our on-campus outreach, going to campus saying hi, but then also for some of our internal programs, like our internal internship programs and our programs for other undergraduates here at Google. I've been at Google for about 4.5 years. I focus now on schools in the Midwest as well as Stanford, and I've had a number of different roles at Google. I started kind of on the engineering side for a bit, went over to the sales and services side, working with our DoubleClick organization on display advertising, and then moved back to the programs team about a little over a year ago. So I'm excited to talk a little bit more about my experiences interviewing students, as well as kind of what I've seen working with different people and different groups here at Google.
Awesome. And Deb?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm Deb LaCastro, and I do the same thing Bryan does, but I do it from the Cambridge office. But yeah, so like Bryan mentioned, we work with a lot of the internal business groups at Google and helping them attract talent from undergrad institutions across the country. So my major focus is on the East Coast region, and I predominantly visit schools throughout the New England area and Mid-Atlantic, but I have also been known to go down south. I have a different background. I've actually been at Google for close to 6 years, and before Google, I was working at a radio station in advertising sales. So when I first joined Google, I joined our advertising sales team and began cold calling sales clients. So I've kind of been on the side of having a really businessy interview and getting asked those tricky questions. So I'm happy to provide some advice on how I landed this job in a business interview and then even transitioned onto the university programs team through another interview.
Cool. Well, welcome. Thanks for you guys for joining. It's great. So we're talking about non-technical interviews. And in the blog, you know, I talked about a lot of things. There are a couple things that I sort of preach to people that are looking for interview advice. I just sort of want to throw out there and then get a couple of sort of, you know, what you guys would consider your biggest tips that we can then sort of work back, get some live questions and kind of go from there. And so my biggest tips, I guess, is that, you know, one, and it's sort of huge for me, is to do your research, right? Like, do your homework. Spend some time going out there and making sure that you're applying for roles that seem relevant, they're interesting, you know what the company does, so you don't show up for an interview and not have any idea what the job is. You know, sort of blocking and tackling, right, like recruiting and interviewing 101. And then there's another thing that I advise people to do that is a little bit more complicated and requires a little bit more work, and most people don't do it, as far as I can tell. I've done it my whole career, so Bryan, I'm dying for your opinion. I actually tell people the night before an interview to go and create a list of the kinds of questions you might get. You know, tell me about your strengths. Tell me about your weaknesses. Tell me about a time you took a risk and failed. Tell me about a time you did something that wasn't required, that you succeeded. I mean, you know, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. And write down these questions, and then write down what you would answer. Like, go through the practice and go through the whole exercise of interviewing before you ever go in the interview. So when you're actually in front of your recruiter, your hiring manager, whoever, and they say, hey, Bryan, what were your strengths and weaknesses? You just go, you know, bah, 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 right through the list, and you're ready, and you're polished, and you've got good answers, and you don't do, I'm a snappy dresser, you know, so that you're really ready when it comes sort of, you know, go time in your interview. And so how do we start with Deb, just to make her uncomfortable? What are sort of your, like, couple of big hints that you would say to people who are doing non-technical interview prep?
So I agree, obviously, with doing your homework ahead of time. I also think that when you're practicing that night before and coming up with questions and answers, look in the mirror. See how you sound when you're answering a question, because I think sometimes even just smiling a little bit can make your answer come off so much more natural and genuine. I'd say, make sure you know a lot about the company without looking creepy. And same for an interviewer, too. Like, research the people you're interviewing with, not to the point where you're asking them questions about their life that they probably wouldn't have wanted you or expected you to know about. But when you're doing your homework, make sure that you have a really solid understanding, not just of yourself and the information you want to get out there to the interviewer, but about the company, so that you're able to kind of craft your answers so that they fit what the company's values are and they fit in line with maybe some of your interviewer's interests and past experiences as well.
Right. Absolutely. Brian, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I would say doing your homework is incredibly important. And for me, that always meant that there were a couple of big things to look at. First is, how does the company actually, what's the business model? How do we generate revenue in one way or another? Google's got a lot of information out there, whether it's AdWords or enterprise sales unit or any of those groups in between that generate revenue. It's important to understand kind of how that works. I think other things that's important to understand, at least for us, is our culture. And we've got a great About page, and there's tons of information out there about what you can look at to understand kind of the things that we value, what's important. I think that's all really important. And then I think the stuff with practice means a lot. It really helps. And I'd even say do it a couple of days ahead of time. Give yourself a chance to work out some of the kinks, some of your catches along the way. I always found that if I would do it with other people, practice with other people, then I could get some real-time feedback on how I was doing. The biggest thing, though, when you get a question that's a basic question, you should always be able to illustrate it with a story. You should be able to say, yes, this is how I feel, this is what I feel like my strengths are, here's a time when I've seen that played out, and that's why I think I'd continue to do that in the future. Because it's always when you can lean on some of that past performance that's going to be indicative to an interviewer if that's probably how you're going to behave again in the future. And that's really what they want to get at. They want to see, are you going to be a good fit on the team? And are you going to be able to kind of help us along, help us accomplish some of our goals and what we want to do? The last piece is that while it's important to understand what the company does, anything that you can find out about specifics, about what a particular organization does or a group, there's so much information out there about the different organizations at Google, what their products are, what their services are, some of the cool things along the way. I think that just shows that you've gone a little bit deeper than the cursory sort of overview of the company About page, and I think that really speaks to a lot of interviewers very positively.
Now, how do you guys, before we take live questions, I actually just sort of had a light bulb moment. So I apologize for anybody that's wanting to hear a live question right now. But how do you guys feel about, Debbie mentioned, learn about the company but don't be creepy. How do you guys feel about when people do a little bit of research on you? Like, I know personally, I interview a lot of people, talk to a lot of people, and they'll, oh, I read your blog last night. And I was like, oh, that's cool. But, I have had situations where, someone's like, oh, I read your blog on the train into the office, and your blog that you wrote yesterday was don't wear a suit, and I'm wearing a suit. Is this going to impact my interview? And it's like, no, yeah. It's okay. These things happen. Is there sort of a line there for you guys on sort of, that company research piece, just so you seem prepared but not, over-prepared?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also is based on the industry. I think within our industry, since we're in technology, pretty much anything that you research about me is something that I've controlled or that I've wanted to put out there. Because I'm pretty tech savvy, I'm really good about making sure that the messages I'm putting out about myself are appropriate and things that I wouldn't be offended or weirded out if someone found out.
Right.
I think if you're having a non-technical interview but in a different industry outside of the tech industry, not to be redundant, I'd be slightly more careful. I think you don't want to, creep on certain social media sites that privacy settings might not be as obvious to most outside the industry. I also don't think you want to lead in with something that's necessarily like, oh, I read this about you, but I think if you can craft an answer that will play off of your interviewer's strengths or interest, I think that that's helpful in just relating to the person a little bit better.
Brian, anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way, that information that you find out about a person through LinkedIn, through other social media sites that are out there, I think that's all great to have, and it's kind of like some of that back pocket stuff. That stuff that you can use to craft your answer, that you can use to cater to your interviewer, but it's not something like, so I looked you up on LinkedIn, and I saw that you did this, and I'd really like to learn more about that. Like, that's about the time when I feel a little like, You're inside my circle here. Hold on. Back off a little. You know, if I bring it up in an interview, then it's fair game, absolutely. But our interview is an opportunity for us to learn a lot about our candidates, and the more that the answer can kind of craft to our interests, that's definitely going to help in sort of that rapport building standpoint. But I've read your biography because I don't have one written. That might be a little too much.
Right. I watch your Hangout on air. You've got great hair. I don't get that one a lot. All right. So we're about halfway through our Hangout on the air, broadcasting live, and talking about non-technical interviews. And so what I want to do is start getting some questions. We've got a bunch of questions people submitted by a moderator. And so we'll just queue a few of those up. We'll get going. We've got questions coming in via Twitter and from the Students Plus page as well, so we've got a lot coming in. And we'll just sort of start jumping through these and see how many we can do over the next 15 minutes. I think my favorite one here is, what are interviewers really looking for when they ask, so tell me about yourself? I know for me, I'm generally not looking for anything when I ask a question like that. I mean, seriously, right? Like, I'm looking to break the ice. And, a lot of times I'll ask people, what's going on? How's it going? And it's completely just icebreaker. I don't know how you guys feel about that kind of question, but I'm sort of just trying to get people comfy so we can chat.
I guess I'm looking for something along those lines. I want to kind of understand what's important to an individual. When they're coming to interview, and I say, tell me about yourself. I'm not looking for the life story. I'm not looking for a 7-minute answer. It's really, the 30 to 60 seconds. This is where I go to school. Here are some of the big things I've involved in. I've had a couple of cool internships. The one that's most important to me is this, and give me like a starting point for conversation. From there, then we can dive down into a lot of different things, and it's really an opportunity for a student or a candidate to set themselves up for success, put their best foot forward right away, shape my perception of them because I don't have one yet, and to go from there.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's quite frankly just the test to see if you did your homework and prepared ahead of time. Because I think, like Bryan said, it shouldn't be a long-winded answer. And for people who have a really succinct elevator pitch for themselves, it shows that they prepared and that they know exactly what they want to get across. It also tells me how long-winded they're going to be. So if this conversation is going to be very one-sided, if it's going to feel more interactive between the two of us, if they answer questions concisely, get to the point, and let's move on, it kind of sets the tone, but also shows me, like, are we in this together?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Cool. All right, so we're going to take another question from, let's see, Ian in Chicago. This is actually a really good one, too. How important is it to have questions prepared at the end of the interview? And then he goes on to say, I feel like it can be forced. Sometimes I don't really have any questions. Deb, we'll let you start. We'll sort of boomerang back around.
I think it's important to have questions because I think by the end of the interview, your interviewer is kind of like done asking questions, and they want to be on the receiving side so they can start talking about themselves. But I think it's really a really good trick that I learned when I was interviewing was you're going to be asked a lot of questions on your interview. A lot of them might be about your background. Some might be opinion questions. Some might be just cognitive challenges. But I think it's always interesting when an interviewer or an interviewee flips the question back at me and says, well, earlier you had asked me what my thought was on X, Y, and Z. I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on this? How does the company believe towards this, et cetera? And I think it kind of either shows a place where you can relate to each other, and the interviewer will say, I actually agreed with your answer, in which case you can kind of leave the interview knowing that, like, oh, score, I did well. Or it just starts like a healthy debate, healthy conversation back and forth, and you really start having that conversation in the last few minutes. So that's a good trick.
Bryan?
Yeah, I'd agree that it's really important. It does definitely show that you're curious in what the person is up to, just the person that's sitting across from you or on the other side of the line. Also that it shows that you've done a little bit of extra research, that you get an opportunity to kind of show off what you know. I would say that, though, there are definite cautions with that. I think my advice is always try and constrain your questions to an area that the interviewer would have some knowledge of. Their field, their career path, what brought them to Google, what their experiences have been. It's a big company. A lot of the companies that students interview for are very large. There's a lot of things going on, and there's stuff in the news that we may or may not have a whole lot of information about. So If it's something that is reasonable, is a fair game, is something that you think that they'd have an idea of, absolutely. But something that's kind of outside their world of expertise, that's kind of like this was definitely a prepared question. They came up with it ahead of time. They're curious about it, which is great, but it doesn't really jive with what we're going for in the interview. So I think it's important to ask those questions, but try and keep them to the area of where the interview's gone so far.
Yeah, I think there's two other things that I like to mention on this front, especially on like a sales interview. Back in a previous life when I was an agency recruiter, we used to encourage candidates to ask for the job. Hey, how'd my interview go? Do you think I'm a good fit for the job? and I think in sales roles, that's actually not a bad question. Of course, the fear is always, well, you're not. Oh, I shouldn't have asked that question. But I feel like that, you can get a lot from that final question, even if it's a question that you might think is mundane. Like, so what's your favorite thing about working at Google? And if you ask every single interviewer that same question, that's really low-hanging fruit for them, you're going to walk away with a lot of information. So I think that those would be sort of my 2 points. Ask for the job if you're, that kind of a person, which most people aren't, which is fine. Or sort of have one sort of stock question that you can go back that night and sort of compare answers and go, oh, actually, look, every single person said the colleagues are great. Cool, sounds like a good place, or whatever. All right, so we're going to get some more questions. We've got about 9 minutes left on our Hangout on the Air with Bryan and Deb talking about non-technical interviewing. We're going to take one from Ankit on Twitter, which is, what's the best way to answer an unexpected question at the beginning? Because he's faced this twice this year. I'll refrain from my joke about saying, because I just did that because I was not expecting this question. So, Bryan, I'll put you on the spot. How do you answer unexpected questions?
Well, first thing is that you shouldn't freak out about it. You're going to get those. We deal with that stuff all the time at work where something comes up and you don't have an answer. With an interview, it's definitely okay to think for a little bit. Pause, collect your thoughts. I mean, if you brought something to write on and you want to structure an answer, if it's a complex question, but if it's something that you don't have a clue of how to go about, just start talking through what your thought process would be to solve that problem. If you were faced with that problem in real life, how would you walk yourself through it? What assumptions would you make? What additional information would you need to have so that you can work to an answer to a question? You're going to get them. They're going to come up. And then I think the thing that most interviewers are looking for is how would you approach it? How would you tackle it? And then where would you go from there? We come across stuff that we don't know what to do with a lot at work. And so how would you respond in a similar situation? And if you can, tie it back to a story. Something that I'm not exactly sure how to go about this, but something that was similar where I came across an unexpected question. You can almost turn the question in some ways. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily answer it right away, but if you're really that out of it or on the wrong page, you're not sure where to go, I think that's a definite place to start.
Yeah, I also think it's important to remember that you can have a little bit of awkward silence. I know that's a little harder when you're having a phone interview because you're like, are you still there? But I think in person, it's okay to kind of take that question by surprise and think, oh, wow, I haven't gotten that question before. Let me take a minute to think about it. But I think, it's really hard to be thrown off if you've done your preparation. Jeff talked about thinking of the questions that you would be asked. I think also just think about 3 things you want to get out there about yourself during an interview. And they might be 3 words, 3 anecdotes, 3 experiences, whatever those 3 things are. And if you keep those 3 things in the back of your mind and let the questions be a little bit more surprising, it won't throw you off if you don't have that script. And I think interviewers do try to throw you off right away because for business roles, like Bryan mentioned, you're going to be expected to think on your feet. And it's how you kind of recover from that shows if you're going to be a good fit for the role. I mean, the other thing is when you're interviewing for a job like sales, the interview isn't just to understand would you be a good fit for the role by how you answer the questions, but sales is selling yourself. And if you can sell yourself in an interview and convince me that you're a great hire, then selling a product, I don't have to ask you about. I kind of get that from the interview and how you conducted it. So I would just say breathe and don't prepare so much that you have a script that you're following because then it's easier to kind of divert from that if necessary.
When you guys both mentioned awkward silence, which I think I mean, it's kind of funny and silly, but like I have no problem with awkward silence in an interview, right? I actually, it's not awkward to me, right? I fully anticipate I'm going to ask you a question that you don't know the answer, and you're going to have to think for a couple minutes, and I'm just not going to say anything while you think. And it might be 2 minutes, it might be 5 minutes. It's been as long as 15. That was a little awkward, but it happens. And I think that most students, in particular, when you're coming in for an interview, it's maybe your first interview, your second interview, you're not used to awkward silence. And so, remember that your interviewer is probably really comfortable there. And it's okay, they sort of expect that. So I think that's sort of a big point, too. We're going to ask, I've got another one coming in from moderator, from Joe in Vancouver. I'll refrain from the Canucks jokes, Bruins. If the interviewer asks a question about experience and I don't have experience, how do I answer that? Deb, I'll let you start.
Yeah, so this actually happened, I guess, to me when I was interviewing for this job on the university programs team. I didn't have recruiting experience before. I was only on the business side. So I think it's important to note that you do have experience. It just might not be the experience you think the company is looking for. So don't discount the stories and the experiences you've had just because they might not align perfectly with the job description. So one thing I did was kind of think at the core responsibilities of what this job is going to require, and have I done those things in other roles? And sometimes those roles are, being a tennis instructor at a day camp, or leading a community service project in college. Just think about the skills that you have and that have been displayed in other scenarios, and try to work that into be your experience. But don't discount everything that you've done before as not being experience. It is. Life is full of experiences. Right?
Absolutely. Bryan, what do you got?
I'd say, very similar. One of the things that I always like to tell students is that at Google we don't have an English department. We don't have an international studies department. We don't have a math department. So, the people that when you come interviewing with your major, it doesn't always necessarily fit. But think about all the things that you've done and what you've done in those roles, and whether you've been paid for them or not, whether you worked with customers, worked with students, worked with faculty. There's all stuff that comes from there. Project groups, all of those things give you experience in a role. If you really haven't done it, and in any way, shape, or form, then it might not be a great fit for the role for you, which is also an important part of an interview, is to find out if you're a good fit for the role, but also if you think that it's a good match for you. So, the thing that I would always do is I'd look at what's all the stuff that I was involved in, what did I do in those roles, what were some of those core competencies that Deb talked about, and how does that play over to what companies do. In recruiting in our organization, we organize a lot of events. I did a lot of that in college, so I was able to lean on a lot of those experiences. When I worked in the sales or the services organization for DoubleClick, a lot of that was working with customers and clients, and I'd had a lot of experience working with faculty who are a little bit older, a little bit more important than I was at the time. So kind of leaning on some of those experiences and how you influence them and how you're able to communicate with people. Or I help my parents out with computers all the time because they're not as tech savvy, and some of the clients that we'd work with wouldn't be. So how can you convey those answers? So thinking about just everything that you've done and how that all fits together and what things that you might be asked for the role, I think that's really important. And a lot of that comes down to, have you done your research ahead of time? Do you understand what that role might entail and how you fit into it? And hopefully by then you can develop a story based on what experiences you do.
Yeah, and I think, just to sort of pile on just a little bit, I think that one of the key parts to that is answering your question in a way that shows you heard the question, you processed it, and you're giving an answer. So as opposed to hey, Jeff, have you ever built a computer? Nope. like I haven't. So my answer might be something to the effect of, I've never actually built a computer, but I have done X, Y, Z that's actually pretty relevant to what you're asking me. And so answering it in a way that you show, yeah, I actually heard what you asked. Rather than just saying no, I'm going to say something that's a little bit more meaningful and talks to those skills, but also sort of acknowledging the fact that you're blowing by the actual question to get to the skill set. So as opposed to just sort of seeming like you're dodging, I guess is sort of how I'd phrase it. So I think we've got about a minute or two here left. I'm going to take one more question from Nathan on Twitter, and it's actually kind of a fun one. jokes aside. The question is basically, when asked, what do you do for fun, what mix of personal and business stories should I use? I find that to be a tough question, because like, I don't like talking about what I like to do. I like to walk my dog and hang out with my family. It's not exactly like, ooh, we should hire that guy because he likes to walk his dog. So I tend to do more sort of businessy. If I was asked that question, I would lean more towards work stuff or stuff that you could tie to work. Oh, well, I like to blog, and I'm active in this, and you know, those kinds of things. And so I think it's a tough question, right? I mean, I don't think there's any way to phrase that, but I think I would lean more towards business with a sprinkling of personal, as opposed to like, I mean, I guess unless I do something so cool that I have, like, you know, I rebuild, you know, vintage cars that I sell for thousands of dollars. Okay, that's pretty cool. But I don't know. I think I would lean more towards businessy stuff. Deborah, what do you got there?
I would use this question as an opportunity to kind of take whatever you weren't able to convey in those more straightforward interview questions and get that third pillar out there. So if I was asked this and no one's really talked to me, or none of the questions lended to me talking about how great I am with working with people, I might use this question and say, I love watching sports. And I love watching sports because I'm a team player. I can relate really well to the camaraderie within sports, and et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of shows that, one, I'm into sports, but two, it's more about teamwork, and it's about being around people, and kind of twist it to kind of get that last point through.
Yeah, that's a good angle. It's a really nice angle. Brian?
I think approaching any interview, you want to have kind of if when this person stops talking to me, that these are the 4 or 5 things, 3 to 5 things that they actually leave with and know about me. And kind of like Deb said, you know, if I wasn't able to convey those through another answer, I think that's a great way to do it. For me, I volunteer a lot. I take a week off every summer to go volunteer, and it's something that I've never gotten directly asked about on a resume. So it's something that I always like to bring up in some capacity, and I think that type of question is a really good one to do it. It's kind of it's a softball in a lot of ways, but you got to be prepared for it. You got to kind of expect it, and you got to say, this is where I'm going to take it if I get it. It should also show kind of what you're passionate about, I think. It should be able to demonstrate, this is the stuff that I would do if I wasn't getting paid for it. So I also am really into wine, and I enjoy doing that. So I enjoy talking to people about it, teaching about it, sampling it, if you will, visiting different wineries, and learning a lot about the business. So I think that's something that's kind of cool. And I enjoy talking about that with people, and I think that could come up in some capacity too. So anything that, you know, gives a little bit more about you as a person that you can't get from a resume and you haven't gotten out in an interview, it's a great way to use that question.
And sort of tie it back to how you might fit to the company or the role. Right? Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that was our last question. So again, Brian, after last week and this week, thank you, sir, for attending our Hang On the Air. I really appreciate it. And Deb, thanks for coming to your first one. Okay. And for anybody listening online, we'll have the video transcript up soon. And we'll be doing another one of these on Thursday with 2 of my favorite Google engineers from the Chicago office, Fitz and Ben. It should be a lot of fun. And thanks again for everybody, and see you guys all soon. Later, Brian.
Have a good one.
Bye.